He was tied to a tree, barefoot, beaten, barely alive, and when they cut him loose, he whispered 3 chilling words. He has more. But what happened next will shock even the most hardened rescuers. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The air in Ashdown that morning carried a kind of sacred stillness, the kind Kevin had always found comfort in. He arrived just after sunrise, parking his Subaru at the trailhead lot and slipping on his worn hiking boots with the quiet ritual of someone who did this not for thrill but for peace. The forest greeted him like an old friend. Tall pines exhaling mist, the hum of insects subdued by the chill, and leaves above already bleeding into ochres and flame reds. He moved through it with the precision of someone who'd memorized the trail's every turn years ago, back when he hiked it with his father before the man's heart gave out during a winter climb on Pikes Peak. Kevin had never returned to that mountain. But Ashdown felt different. Safe, forgiving, smaller somehow. He kept his phone in airplane mode, relying instead on a GPS transponder clipped to his shoulder strap. It pinged his location every 5 minutes to a cloud log Sarah had access to. She wasn't the panicky type, but Kevin knew she worried when he shut off. He loved her for that. Still, this trip wasn't for her. It was for the noise in his head, the meetings, the endless code reviews, the guilt over not flying back home more often. Solitude here wasn't loneliness. It was medicine. By mid-afternoon, he reached a stone outcrop known locally as Widow's Watch, a jagged ledge overlooking a deep pine valley. He dropped his pack, drank half a liter of water, and sat still enough to hear the wing beats of ravens cutting across the air. It felt perfect. And then, around 5:42 p.m., exactly mid-transmission, his GPS stopped. The last signal showed him heading east, toward a less marked section of trail known as Copper Ridge Loop. Not treacherous, but less trafficked and harder to navigate after dark. Sarah noticed the freeze on the map at 8:07 the next morning, just as she was about to text him her usual, "You alive?" check-in. She waited another 6 hours. Nothing. At 2:19 p.m., she called the ranger station. They logged it as probable dehydration or turned ankle. Search protocol would begin at dawn. Sarah's hands trembled as she ended the call, not from fear exactly, but from a certainty she couldn't explain. She stared at the last pinned dot on the map, that little red icon blinking beside a featureless curve in the terrain. Something was wrong. Kevin hadn't just gone missing. He had disappeared. The third morning dawned colder than expected. Thick fog clung to the treetops, and frost glistened on the ranger station's windshields like glass dust. The air held a strange tension, the kind only known to those who had searched too many forests, found too many bodies, and learned that silence in the wild often meant something had gone terribly wrong. By now, Kevin Myers had been missing for nearly 48 hours. No footprints, no gear, no torn fabric snagged on brush. Just a red dot frozen on a map, and a woman in Denver who hadn't slept. The sheriff called in the K-9 unit at 6:41 a.m. Their arrival wasn't dramatic. No flashing lights, no barking dogs leaping from trucks. Just 2 vehicles with county plates and a kind of grim efficiency that made the search crew stop talking. First out was Tom Whitaker, 47, gray-flecked beard, eyes like cold slate. He moved with the weariness of someone who'd seen too much and processed none of it. His uniform was plain, save for a patch stitched onto the shoulder. K-9 unit, Whitaker. Behind him, leaping from the back of the truck with silent urgency, came Max, a deep-chested sable German shepherd with eyes as intelligent as they were haunted. He sniffed the air once and sat at Tom's heel like a statue. The second truck door swung open, revealing Mia Lang, just 24 and still green around the edges. She wore a too-clean jacket and overcompensated with a firm jaw, but the nerves were visible in her eyes. Nova, her dog, bounded out beside her, slightly smaller, quicker, and eager, but no less trained. Mia had raised her from 8 weeks, drilled every command into her with trembling hands and quiet determination. Today would be Nova's first real test outside of training drills. Tom studied the terrain without a word, then pulled a laminated scent article from a zippered pouch, one of Kevin's hiking socks, delivered by Sarah via overnight courier. He handed it to Mia without looking. "You do it." Mia swallowed, held the sock out for Nova, and gave the release command. The shepherd's nose twitched, body stiffening. She turned southeast, then west, pacing in a focused zigzag. Tom grunted approval. "They'll find the path, but they don't always find the person." He watched Max follow Nova's lead, already scent-locked and moving like a needle on thread. He paused only once, looking back at Tom with an expression the handler had come to recognize: urgency. Tom's voice was low, almost to himself. "Let's see where ghosts lead us today." The sun was sinking fast behind the tree line, casting long, blade-like shadows across the forest floor. Ashdown's golden canopy had turned amber and rust in the late light, the warmth of color belying the creeping cold that coiled between the trunks like smoke. For hours, the K9 unit had combed sector grids with steady mechanical discipline. Max led most of the way, nose low and purposeful, with Nova flanking wide in tight arcs. Their path carved through dense underbrush, across dry creek beds, and along deer trails barely visible to human eyes. It had been a methodical search, focused, controlled, until Max stopped cold. It happened with no signal, no hesitation. 1 second he was trotting confidently beside Tom, the next, gone, slicing through a thicket like a bullet. Nova sprang after him without waiting for a cue. Her bark pierced the quiet with a pitch that sent every hair on Mia's arms upright. Not alarm, not aggression, urgency. A sound trained handlers learned to fear because it meant only one thing: something alive, something in distress, and something very, very wrong. "God damn it, Max!" Tom barked, tearing after them, branches whipping against his chest. He didn't stop to check the map. He didn't need to. His legs knew the terrain. His body ran on instinct, but his mind already feared what waited below. Mia followed, heart hammering in her throat, feet slipping in pine needles as the ground tilted into a steep descent. "Nova!" she shouted, breathless, catching the dog's high-pitched yelps through the tangle of forest. Then, silence. They broke through the bramble seconds later into a hollow, damp and shadowed, where the trees grew too close together, where the light didn't quite reach. Max was circling something near a stand of twisted firs. His tail was stiff, ears flattened, not a search stance, not a signal of discovery, a signal of dread. Nova was at the base of one tree, paws black with churned earth. She had clawed through the moss and leaf litter, exposing gnarled roots and a shallow depression. Her chest heaved. Her muzzle was bloodied from the effort. Mia's voice cracked. "What? What is it?" Max stopped circling and stood perfectly still, staring into the dark cluster of trees. His body trembled, just once, then let out a low, keening whimper. It cut through the stillness like a wire pulled taut. Tom's breath caught. Dogs didn't whimper for victory. They only made that sound when what they'd found was beyond comprehension and still alive. It was the smell that hit Tom first. Copper, sweat, and something sour beneath it all, like old rope and fear soaked into bark. The dogs had stopped just yards away, their silence now reverent, almost mournful, as though they understood what came next was no longer a job, but a reckoning. Tom pushed past the last line of brush and froze. For a moment, he thought it was a corpse. The stillness. the way the body slumped forward despite being lashed upright, as if gravity itself had given up on kindness. Kevin Myers was bound to the trunk of a pine tree so tightly that the bark had carved angry welts across his shoulders. Zip ties bit into his wrists, nearly purple with pooled blood. A coarse, fraying rope wound across his chest and hips in a crosshatch, pinning him in place like a grotesque marionette waiting for command. His face was barely recognizable, one eye swollen shut, cheekbone bruised to the color of ash, lips split and caked in dry blood. He wasn't shivering. That scared Tom more than if he had been. His hiking socks were still on, soaked through, but his boots were missing. So was his phone. Around his neck hung a dirty rag, tied in a crude knot. A gag. Loosened now, but still damp with saliva and soil. It hadn't been taken off. It had simply lost its hold. Tom stepped closer, slowly, not wanting to startle him. "Kevin?" The man stirred, barely. His good eye blinked open, then fixed on Tom. For a second, just a fraction, something in that gaze tightened, as if unsure whether rescue had come or death had simply changed form. And then, like a dam buckling, the recognition hit. Kevin's chest shook with a sob so raw it seemed to tear through him, soundless at first, then rising in jagged gasps. Mia stumbled forward, dropping to her knees as her breath caught in her throat. Who would do this to him?" Tom crouched beside Kevin, carefully reaching for a knife. He began slicing through the rope with slow, deliberate movements. "Don't move," he said softly. "You're safe now. We've got you." Kevin's lips moved, barely audible. "He has..." His voice cracked, throat dry and ragged. "He has... more." Tom froze. Not alone. Not finished. This wasn't just rescue. It was the beginning of something far worse. The whir of the medevac blades faded into the sky like a dying scream, leaving behind only unsettled silence and the lingering churn of footprints in the soft forest loam. Tom stood with arms folded, jaw locked, eyes fixed on the empty space where the helicopter had lifted Kevin from the clearing. The young man hadn't spoken again, but the look in his eye, raw, haunted, half-feral, had said enough. Something inside him had been flayed open, and Tom knew the healing wouldn't begin until the thing that did this was found. By the time the sun had fully dropped behind the peaks, a mobile command unit had been set up at the base of the trailhead. Local law enforcement, state investigators, and federal agents rotated through like gears in a machine suddenly awakened from years of dormancy. Not since the disappearance of Dean Calloway 3 years earlier had the town seen this kind of mobilization. Back then, it was ruled a tragic accident. Calloway's backpack discovered at the edge of a cliff, his notebook water-streaked and half-frozen. No body, no foul play. Just an empty space in a family photo and a memorial hike held once a year by his grieving parents. Now, that ruling was being revisited with a different lens. Kevin had spoken clearly, if briefly. A man in his 50s, weathered face, commanding voice, clean clothes. He wore a ranger's coat with a sheriff's patch stitched above the chest, but no badge, no radio, no credentials. Kevin hadn't questioned it at first. The man seemed helpful, friendly, told him there'd been a bear sighting farther up the ridge and offered a lift back to the ranger post. Kevin remembered the way the man smiled when he hesitated. "Trust me, kid," he'd said. "Out here, it's the things you don't see that'll kill you." He never gave a name, but the image, burned into Kevin's memory like a brand, was unmistakable. Grizzled beard, yellowed teeth, one cloudy eye. The town erupted with speculation. Every retired ranger, reclusive hunter, and off-grid local was suddenly suspect. Social media lit up with old sightings, whispers of strange encounters from years past that had been brushed off as backwoods paranoia. But in the sheriff's office, something colder settled in. They had a predator who didn't rush, a man who had waited. And now that the lie was cracked open, the scent of blood and memory hung heavy in the trees. This wasn't the first victim, and everyone knew it wouldn't have been the last. They called it a formality at first, a routine step, a name to cross off the list. But the moment Kevin muttered the description, low voice, eyes unfocused, the trauma still raw, every veteran in the sheriff's office went still. A man in his 50s, weathered, one cloudy eye, patch but no badge. The words cut through the room like a blade. Dale Cooper. A name spoken with an uncomfortable familiarity. He'd been one of them once, a respected park ranger who knew every bend of Ashdown like the lines on his palms. He used to teach school kids about fire safety, lead rescue drills, pose for press photos with retirees and lost Cub Scouts. The fall came fast and quiet. A few troubling incidents, a report of aggression toward a camper, then rumors, unconfirmed, of strange behavior during solo patrols. Voices heard on his radio long after his shift had ended. He was asked to retire. Mental health reasons, they wrote. Clean break, no internal review, no charges. They let him go home with his uniform. They let him stay close. They let him vanish. The manhunt began within hours of Kevin's statement. No warrant needed, just eyes, boots, and dogs. He had no registered address, no utilities, no banking activity in 2 years. Only whispers. He was seen hunting near Crater Ridge last spring. Someone spotted smoke in a no-burn zone. A hiker claimed he met a ranger in an area the park no longer patrolled. On the third day, they found it. A narrow ledge hidden beneath a bluff in the western quadrant, where the forest thickens and cell signals die. The entrance was obscured by brambles, covered in pine and stone. No visible trail led to it, but behind the curtain of nature, the cabin stood, low, wide, weathered wood, windows blacked out with cloth. The stench hit first, mildew, old meat, rot. Inside, the nightmare unfolded. Rows of hiking boots lined the wall, mismatched and dirty, soles cut clean off. ID tags and laminated permits were pinned like trophies to a rotting corkboard. Dozens of them, some cracked and faded, some recent. On the far table, a spiral notebook lay open, its pages filled with looping, obsessive handwriting. Names, dates, coordinates. Beside each one, hand-drawn maps, detailed, meticulous. Paths through the forest, circled trees, X marks burned deep into paper. It wasn't a home. It was a hunting lodge, and the prey had always been human. The forest had gone quiet again. But it wasn't the peace of nature. It was the hush that follows a revelation so heavy it presses the very air down around your shoulders. Ash hung in the sky from the flares used to mark the site, and smoke from the cabin's now extinguished fire clung to everything, bitter and greasy. The scent of it twisted into the roots of the trees and the threads of the rescuers' clothes, like it was trying to become permanent. Outside the cabin, behind a cluster of pines just beyond sight of the overhang, they found it. A second tree, older rope, frayed and sun-bleached, still looped in place around the thick trunk. One strand dangled loosely, fibers split like a burst nerve. The knots had weathered into the bark, cutting deep, leaving grooves like scar tissue on the living wood. And beneath it, half buried in moss and mud, was a tattered backpack, its seams broken, its fabric faded almost to gray. The tag stitched inside was barely legible, but Mia held it up to the fading light and didn't need to read the name. Dean Calloway. He had been there all along. Not lost. Not fallen. Taken. The discovery rippled through the scene like a tremor. A deputy stepped back and whispered something under his breath. A young forensic tech began to cry and didn't try to stop. No one spoke for several long minutes. There was nothing left to say. Tom stood frozen, phone in hand, as the implications settled on him like a weight he could no longer ignore. This wasn't just closure. It was confirmation of the very thing no one wanted to believe, that a predator had operated here for years under their watch, that a boy declared missing had never wandered, never stumbled, never slipped. He'd been erased. Max, who had been quiet beside Tom, gave a soft whine and nudged his handler's leg with his snout. Then, slowly, he padded over to the pack, sniffed once, and lay down beside it. Not like a canine tracking a trail, but like a dog mourning a presence he could still feel in the air. Later, when the forest had emptied and the paperwork began, Tom and Mia sat in the cab of their truck, headlights off, wrapped in the kind of silence that speaks for itself. Nova and Max slept in the back, curled around each other like they had known all along. Mia's voice was barely audible. "He'd be dead if it weren't for them." Tom nodded, jaw clenched. They knew what we didn't want to believe. The sky was the soft blue of early October when Kevin returned. Cool enough for breath to show in the shade, warm enough for sunlight to ease its way through the turning leaves. The training field outside the K9 compound smelled of cut grass and autumn. It had been nearly 5 weeks since the rescue, and Kevin walked differently now, not with limp or injury, but with the unmistakable hesitance of someone reacquainting himself with the world. The wounds on his face had faded into thin, pale lines, but the ones behind his eyes still lingered, visible in the way he scanned every room, paused at corners, flinched at sudden movement. Time would help. But not all wounds ask to be healed. Tom saw him first, watching through the wire fence as Max and Nova trotted through agility drills in tandem, shoulder to shoulder, synchronized in motion like a living pulse. He didn't say anything, just nodded and opened the gate. Kevin held a letter in one hand, not sealed, no envelope, just folded, slightly creased, written on paper that had been handled often. He didn't offer it to Tom. Instead, he knelt slowly and extended it toward Max, who approached without hesitation, tail held low and calm. Kevin's voice caught once, but when he finally spoke, it wasn't for the humans. "You didn't just find me," he said softly. "You saw me, when no one else did." Max looked at him, then pressed his head gently against Kevin's chest. Nova approached next, nuzzling his side before lying down at his feet. Mia stood at a distance, eyes glassy. She'd seen dogs do many things. She'd never seen them do this. Tom stepped forward only after a long silence. "You didn't have to come," he said. "I did," Kevin replied. "I wasn't supposed to still be here." There was no ceremony, no medals, no speeches, just the weight of a moment made sacred by its simplicity. Kevin reached forward, kissed the top of Max's head, and closed his eyes. "You gave me back my life," he whispered. The court case had already passed. Dale Cooper convicted without contest, his journal damning in every detail. 2 other cases had reopened, 2 families contacted, 2 graves marked at last. Justice, in its cold, clinical way, had been served. But it wasn't the sentencing that stayed with the team. It was Tom Whitaker, once silent, once unreachable, who turned to Mia as Kevin walked away, smiled for the first time in years, and said, "This is why we still do it."